I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Jared Zystro is Organic Seed Alliance's Research and Education Assistant Director. He has a PhD in plant breeding and plant genetics and has worked in the organic seed industry for over 15 years. He currently manages OSA's regional development in California, conducts participatory breeding projects and variety trials, and teaches seed production and plant breeding. He lives in the coastal town of Arcata with his wife and son. Kiki Hubbard is a Director of Advocacy and Communications for Organic Seed Alliance. Her work on seed policy spans 20 years in the areas of antitrust, biotechnology, consolidation, intellectual property, and organic regulation. She and her co-worker, Jared, co-lead OSA's State of Organic Seed project. She lives in Montana. Liza Wood is an environmental social science PhD student at University of California, Davis. She has been studying governance of food systems for the last 10 years in Europe and Southeast Asia, but only recently has started focusing on the US. Now she uses an interdisciplinary network lens to research how seed is managed in the US and is excited to partner with the State of Organic Seed to apply this work. Carolyn Baptiste, she, her, is the communications manager for Organic Farming Research Foundation. She's also the owner of River Valley Country Club, a vegetable, poultry, and sheep farm in occupied Coast Salish land in Washington State's Snoqualmie Valley. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kiki.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm really thrilled to be introducing you to our next State of Organic Seed report, which we hope will be released by the end of the month. And this is your sneak peek. You are the first audience to hear about some of our findings. Okay, let's see if I have control. Bear with me for a sec. There we go. All right, I'm sure some of you are already familiar with Organic Seed Alliance's work, but for those of you who aren't, our mission is to advance ethical seed solutions to meet food and farming needs in a changing world. And we do this through research, education, and advocacy programs. Now, the project we're going to talk about today, our State of Organic Seed report, provides an action plan for this program work, again, in research, education, and policy advocacy as it applies to this mission. But our hope is that it also provides a roadmap for stakeholders and decision makers who participate in and have some influence over organic seed systems more broadly. Getting the hang of these slides, I think it takes a couple of clicks. Thanks for bearing with me. Now, we have been releasing our State of Organic Seed report for over a decade. And as Amy said, we're about to release our third, and we're really proud about the fact that we are able to keep up with this 5-year timeline, at least so far. Our first report was published in 2011, the second in 2016. And you can find both of these reports if you want to dig into some more of the background of the project, see some of that data from previous reports at our website, which is listed there at the bottom of the slide. So during today's session, we're going to share an overview of the project, including some background, the principles and objectives that guide our project. And we'll, as I said before, share with you some of our key findings. We'll talk about how this data compares to previous data we collected for the 2011 and 2016 reports, and we'll be able to communicate to you some of the progress we're seeing as well as progress we're not seeing. Then we're going to go over a few recommendations. There are many that we're including in the report, but we'll just touch on a couple. And then we're going to invite Caroline with OFRF to provide everyone an update on Organic Farming Research Foundation's National Organic Research Agenda, their NORA report, which they also aim to publish every 5 years. We have been collaborating on some data collection with OFRF, and we will be co-releasing our reports, again, with the goal of this month. And then, of course, we want to leave as much time as possible for questions and answers. So let's dig in. Our State of Organic Seed project is an ongoing project to monitor organic seed systems in the United States and the organic seed supply that these systems aim to support. It's hard to believe that nearly 20 years have passed since the US organic regulations went into effect under the oversight of the National Organic Program. The success of the organic label has been monumental. I'm sure some of you have seen the data that the consumer demand for organic products really shows no sign of slowing. And we at Organic Seed Alliance view the organic regulations, the organic label, as the strongest food production standard available to us, one having high integrity and one that really serves as the gold standard in the marketplace. There's nothing like it, nothing else that exists like it in the marketplace. And so to us, this growth from a market perspective is good news. Now, when the National Organic Program launched in 2002, the new regulations contained an aspirational goal. And I use the word aspirational. Well, the goal was to require organic growers to source organic seed. And we're using the word aspirational because at the time the rules were implemented in 2002, there were very few organic seed suppliers that existed, and therefore very little certified organic seed available to growers. So the regulations allowed growers to source seed that wasn't certified organic when they could demonstrate a lack of availability in the commercial marketplace or lack of availability of an equivalent variety. Now, this leeway still exists, but the availability of organic seed has increased tremendously over the past 2 decades. Now, as already mentioned, this report is published every 5 years, and we release this as a progress report and action plan for increasing organic seed systems. And again, the organic seed supply these systems support. And we also hope to foster seed grower networks and policies that aim to decentralize power and ownership in seed systems. As such, this project has a number of objectives. I'm going to ask Jared to pop this list into the chat box if he's able. I'm not going to take time to walk through all these objectives, but I'll just share a couple to give you an idea of some of the purposes behind this report. One is to help organic farmers meet the National Organic Program requirement to use certified organic seed and to advocate for more consistent and stronger enforcement of the rule. Another objective is to identify urgent organic seed research and education needs and to use these needs, to communicate these needs in order to increase investments in organic seed systems with the broader goal of increasing the availability, quality, diversity, and genetic integrity of organic seed. Now, we at OSA believe that more than ever, organic seed is viewed as the foundation of organic integrity and is an essential component to furthering the principles underpinning the organic movement. So I just want to share a few of these principles with you now, if my screen will let me. Now, the principles guiding this project aim to support the development of organic seed systems that are decentralized and democratic and result in a robust supply of organic seed. I'm going to ask Jared again to paste the full list in here because we're not going to go through all of them. These were first developed as part of our 2011 report, the first report we published, and that was more than a decade ago. So over the years, these principles have been evolving with stakeholder input, and we welcome you throughout this session to identify gaps that you see in these principles and to provide input in the chat box or during the Q&A session as well. But just to share a few here, organic food should begin with organic seed. And as I'll talk about here in a minute, we believe strongly in this principle, not only because it's a regulatory requirement, but because we believe that the benefits of growing and planting more organic seed go well beyond simply meeting a regulatory requirement. Seeds are a vital yet vulnerable natural resource that must be respected and managed in a manner that enhances long-term viability and integrity. Agricultural research should serve more than one goal and should strive to increase benefits for all living systems, including soil, plants, animals, and humans. Sorry, it's taking a moment to change slides. Action must be taken to remove structural barriers to adjust an equitable seed and food system, the equitable exchange of seed with appropriate acknowledgement consent and compensation, enhances innovation and curtails the negative impacts of consolidation and concentrated ownership, consolidated power and decision-making. And growers in their communities have the right to determine whether and how culturally important seeds are used and shared. Indigenous knowledge should be recognized as the foundation of organic farming and agroecology, and uplifted in partnerships and leadership. Now, we humbly acknowledge that our first two reports lacked a social justice and racial equity lens. So as these project principles evolve, we are working hard to remedy that shortcoming by committing to new principles, including those I just shared, and letting those principles guide and serve as a touchstone again in our data collection and analysis, as well as our policy recommendations. And as you'll see here, in important ways, these principles are connected to those established by IFOAM, by the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements. Our hope is that these principles can serve, as I just said, as a touchstone for the organic seed movement to ensure that organic seed investments and producers alike embrace health, ecology, fairness, and care as they grow alongside the success of the broader organic industry. As I mentioned before, these principles suggest inherent benefits to developing organic seed systems, benefits that again go beyond helping organic farmers meet a requirement to use organic seed. In our view, growing and planting more organic seed has positive impacts on the climate, human health, growers, and the environment. A few examples include that we know seeds are alive and adapt to changing climates through seed saving, selection, and other field-based breeding techniques. And we also know that this adaptation is key for crop survival, as well as helping growers mitigate the challenges and risks they're facing by unpredictable and shifting climates. But beyond mitigating the impacts of our warming climate, organic practices also reduce greenhouse gas contributions. For example, organic seed is produced without fossil fuel-based fertilizers, which is a major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. And in a similar vein, and I probably don't have to remind you that organic seed is grown without synthetic pesticides. As we see the number and volume of pesticides increasing in our fields, we're seeing enormous harm being done to non-target organisms, water and soil quality, and human health. So this means that when farmers and as well as gardeners or any grower chooses to plant organic seed, they're choosing to keep upstream pollution caused by these synthetic pesticides and other inputs out of our soils, out of our water, air, and our food. And lastly, as a social movement, we believe that organic seed can take a distinct path from the dominant conventional seed industry. The dominant seed trade uses consolidation and privatization as key strategies for growth. And as the seed industry further concentrates ownership of seed, we are witnessing evidence that organic seed growers and their networks are striving to expand the organic seed supply through strategies of decentralized power and ownership, in part to avoid the negative consequences of consolidation and privatization, such as through restrictive intellectual property rights protections. I think this conference is evidence of this desire for decentralization. The report, as I mentioned, aims to be a tool for monitoring progress toward meeting the organic seed needs of organic growers in the US. We also hope it helps people understand the intersection of various stakeholders involved in organic seed systems and how to support their success. Our most recent report that will be published soon is the culmination of more data than we've ever collected for this project before. In total, our findings are drawn from 7 data sets, 4 different surveys that targeted organic producers, organic certifiers, organic researchers, and organic seed producers, which includes organic seed companies. We also conducted a number of interviews with organic seed producers and compiled a database of research investments, public research investments going toward organic plant breeding and other organic seed initiatives. Lastly, we leaned on our friends at Organic Farming Research Foundation for some data that they drew from 16 listening sessions, focus groups hosted across the country with organic farmers, and more than 100 organic farmers attended these sessions. So with that, let's move on to learn more about what we pulled from all this data. What are our key findings? With that, I'm going to let Jared take back control.
Thank you so much, Kiki. And thank you all for taking the time to be present in the session today. As Kiki said, this is really a snapshot. In a few weeks, we'll release the full report. And between the report itself and the accompanying data sets, you'll be able to find out as much as you could ever want to know about the results of these different surveys. For the sake of today, we really just want to focus on those key findings. What are some of the highlights? Just before we begin, I'm going to start by talking about the organic producer survey. So this was a survey, as Kiki said, of certified organic producers that we conducted in conjunction with OFRF and their NORA report. And we heard from over 1,000 producers at a range of scales, growing a wide array of crops, and with geographic representation that was fairly in line with the general representation and relative concentration of producers according to the USDA database. The first key finding that I want to share with you from the organic producer survey is that we found that most producers are still using non-organic seed for at least part of their operation. As Kiki said, there's more and more availability of organic seed, but for a variety of reasons, what we see is that this is looking at all three of our surveys from 2011, 2016, and now our most recent one. We haven't seen a large change in how many producers are using 100% organic seed for their entire operation. It's been somewhere in this, 25-ish% range, and haven't seen much shifting there. One place that we did see a little bit of shifting is in sort of smaller and medium scale vegetable producers. So vegetable producers who grew fewer than 50 acres of crops, they were showing that they were using more organic seed. So this is looking at the percent of organic seed that they, or percent of vegetable acreage planted to organic seed. In other words, how much of their vegetable acreage were they using organic seed with? And then on the x-axis here, you can see kind of the acreage going up from, 0 to 3 basically on up. And what we can see is that if you look kind of in the, folks doing less than 3 acres, less than 10, less than 50, in this range, you can see kind of this consistent trend of increased organic seed usage. We don't see really a trend of any sort as we look at the larger acreage. We also don't see any real improvement in or increase in organic seed sourcing in the other crop categories, such as field crops, forage crops, and cover crops. So looking here, again, it's because we've done this now 3 times, we can get a sense of if there is some movement or not. And in this case, for field crops, basically been stagnant with around 70 to 80% of acreage being planted to organic seeds. That's each individual respondent saying how much of their acreage was planted to organic seed. And we can see for forage crops, it's been around 60%. And cover crop, we didn't ask this question in exactly the same way in 2011, so we don't have that data to compare between our 2016 and 2021 report. We can see there really hasn't been a shift in organic cover crop seed usage. one of the questions that we look at is trying to dive in a little bit to both the push and the pull of organic seed usage, both in terms of are there barriers that are preventing growers or making producers disinclined to use organic seed, things around organic seed quality, availability, and so on. But also one of the largest kind of pushes is around certifiers. As Kiki mentioned, in the organic requirement, there is a goal of using organic seed with these exemptions built in. And what we found in the past is that when certifiers requested producers try harder by doing more steps, for example, than just looking at 3 catalogs, that there was the producers who had certifiers making those additional requests of them tended to use more organic seed over time. What we see looking here, though, is that over the course of these 3 surveys, over the course of these last 10 years, that producers report that certifiers are asking them to do more, are less frequently asking producers to do more than just look for 3 sources for organic seed. So we see this trend down where fewer certifiers are making additional requests for producers to grow organic seed. So on that kind of push side, we're seeing, at least in this most recent report, we're seeing less certifier action. On the pull side, in terms of what are the limits, what are keeping growers from feeling like they can use more organic seed, the number one reported constraint was varieties not being available. So variety unavailability was the top reason that producers said they're not sourcing organic seed. And you can see this has been relatively constant between when we asked this question in 2016 and when we asked it again. If anything, there's kind of a slight increase in producers who are reporting this as a significant factor. And this is across all crop categories. You can see only, in this case, this time around, 18% of crop producers said that varietal inavailability was not a factor in their decision to produce organic seed. Everyone else said it was at least a slight factor, and the majority said it was a significant factor. Looking at distinctions in scale, one thing that we noticed is that, going back in our minds at least to the slide where we saw that the smaller scale organic producers were actually sourcing more organic seed, but that we weren't seeing that same trend in the larger scale organic vegetable producers. It's worthwhile to kind of split out, are some of these limitations in terms of why producers aren't sourcing organic seed? Do we see scale differences there? And one of them that we saw was that for larger vegetable producers, so the producers that produce 50 to 80, 80 to 160, 160 to 480, or over 480 acres, that for them, we did see a slight shift where buyers or processors who they work with, who they sell to or sell through, were that when buyers or processors require a specific variety, that variety may not be available as organic seed. And so if that contract requirement specifies varieties that's not available as organic, that will be a factor in not being able to use organic seed. And what we saw was that between 2016 and 2021, we saw that more of these larger scale vegetable producers reported that buyers requesting a specific variety that wasn't available as organic, that became more of a factor in them not sourcing organic seed. On the flip side, we see these limitations, and we see these gaps in the growth of organic seed usage. I think it's worthwhile to remember that despite that, producers who responded to our survey still feel strongly in the value of organic seed. So we asked a few questions around values and attitudes around organic seed, around organic plant breeding. One of them was for growers, the producer respondents, to react to the statement of organic seed is important to the integrity of organic food production. And what we found was that the majority strongly agreed with that statement, and the vast majority, agreed or strongly agreed that organic seed is important to the integrity of organic food production. We also heard that producers felt that varieties that were bred for organic production are important to the success of organic agriculture. We can see similarly, the majority felt this way, and the felt strongly agreed with this statement, and the vast majority, agreed or strongly agreed. So we see within the organic producer community the attitude that organic seed and organic plant breeding are important. And so that is a ray of hope here. I want to shift now, and I will say that there's, as I said before, a lot more detail that can be found from these surveys in our full report and in the accompanying data that will come with it. These are just some of the highlights for today. I want to shift over to another one of the tools that we used to look at the state of organic seed, and that's our organic research funding analysis. In very briefly, the methods here were that we searched through the USDA and foundation funding lists looking for public organic seed and breeding projects using some specific search terms, and found about 198 that have been funded over the past, I want to say 20 some years. And we then took those projects and categorized them in different ways according to the year they were funded, what region they were primarily working in, what the funding source was, and what the crop types were. Let me again just give you a few of the highlights from this. The number one highlight to point out was that we saw a significant increase in funding looking at the last 5 years since our last report. Looking over time, this is total funding for public organic seed and breeding initiatives. We can see in the last 5 years, this is $39 million that's been directed towards organic seed and organic plant breeding research. The number one funder for this work is the Organic Research and Education Initiative, OREI, and see that this, the bulk of the funding is coming from them, with some additional coming from other federal programs, and then some coming from private enterprise, private support from private foundations and companies. This is actually, I'm showing you the aggregate here over all of these projects, but in the last 5 years, this has only shifted to where OREI has become an even larger source. Second thing to point out is, as I said, we've looked at what categories of research were being supported by these funding sources, and the vast majority is going towards projects that are primarily focused on organic plant breeding and or organic variety trials. The other categories we had included policy, enterprise development, systems development, and seed production research and education. And those all represent a much smaller sliver of that pie. finally, when we look at what region, and we split these up based into SARE regions, the bulk of there was relatively equally allocated among regions, though, North Central and Western receiving, more funding, almost twice as much as, the Southern and then Western regions. But the multi-region projects are where the bulk of the funding has been going to. So with that is the highlights from the Organic Producers Survey and the Organic Research Funding Analysis. And I'm going to pass over control of the screen to Liza so that she can share a little bit from the Organic Seed Producers Survey. And let's see, remote control. Okay, Liza, I think you should be in control.
All right, thanks, Jared. All right, so I'm going to share some of the key findings from the Organic Seed Producer Survey. And I think Jared and I both sort of italicized the word seed here because you may have noticed we have a number of data sets. And I want to be clear that this group is different from the organic growers that Jared just described. And the Organic Seed Producer Survey is a new effort for State of Organic Seed. So while organic growers have now been surveyed for 15 years, this group has not been surveyed in previous reports. And so the first task was for us to try to capture just who this group really is. What does it mean to be an organic seed producer? And for the sake of this report, we considered seed producers as those who listed seed as a certified crop or product in the National Organic Program database, or operations that identify as organic seed companies. And so with this designation, we created a big list of all their operations that fit that description. And I want to give a snapshot of sort of who these seed producers are before we talk about some of the key findings about them. I'm also practicing my clicking that Kiki had. Okay. So the first thing I want to point out is that the West is overwhelmingly a hub of seed producers. There were about 5 to 10 more seed producers and companies in the West compared to other regions on our whole seed producer list. But overall, we heard from about 25% of the people that we reached out to, which was about 130 different seed producers and companies, with good representation from each region. So the distribution on the slide is a little different than the grower distribution that Jared showed with more dense producers in the West, but some pretty good representation from across the country. And a few general snapshots of these seed production operations is that many are growing multiple different crop categories of seed crops. So we have about 75% are producing vegetable seed, 50% of these seed producers are planting ornamentals, which also includes flowers and perennials, and then a third growing small grains, propagated crops, forage, cover crops, etc. And these are small and large operations. So nearly 30% of our respondents are grossing under 50,000 annually, a quarter between 50 and 300,000, and less than half making more than 300,000 annually. So this is just sort of the first picture of what seed production operations look like, and us trying to wrap our heads around, who these respondents are. And what this survey really focused on was trying to understand the challenges and the perspectives of seed producers and companies. So we're gonna talk through some of those. And what we did first was we provided seed producers with a long list of potential production challenges and asked them to rate the seriousness of that challenge. And in this figure, we list just the top 7 challenges that the seed producers identified, which sort of highlight estimating and achieving yields, controlling weeds, pest and disease pressure, and climate effects. And here, the darker color in the figure represents the seriousness of the challenge. So for example, 54% of our respondents rank achieving adequate seed yields as a serious or moderate challenge, and 41% rank adapting to climate change as a serious or moderate challenge. So you'll kind of look at the left-hand side of these figures. And And especially regarding the top challenge, achieving and estimating seed yields, seed producers in our surveys, we also did focus groups, pointed to the need for support like a database of expected yield ranges and market price ranges, as well as better regional data gathering. Now we can slice the data up to look at these challenges from a few different angles. So for example, we could compare the challenges between crops, but when we do that, we don't see a lot of variation. We see that producers of vegetable seeds, forage, and cover crop seeds are all reporting pretty similar challenges. But we do see some variation across regions. And so, for example, here we're showing the top 5 challenges for growers in the southern region, which there are a lot fewer responses from this region, which maybe you'll notice in the figure. But from those, their top 5 challenges really emphasize the cost of cleaning seed and harvest costs, as well as sourcing the appropriate equipment for these needs as their top challenges. So in this region, there seems to be a much bigger emphasis on infrastructure needs than in other parts of the country. We can also do the same by looking at the Northeast challenges, where seed producers from this region expressed similar challenges to what we see at the country level. But here, climate change adaptation and managing climatic effects really rose to the top of the list. And this can bring us to what we saw about some perceptions of climate through our survey. So climate is impacting organic seed growers and is viewed as a threat to their production. When we asked about the effect of climate change on agriculture in their lifetime, 85% of seed producers say that they are worried about its effects as being significantly or somewhat harmful to agriculture in their region. And interviews and open-ended comments about this issue show that seed producers are discussing issues like fires and smoke affecting pollination and seed production, winds and unpredictable freezes, and the lack of adequate rainfall. But in addition to production challenges, we also asked seed producers about non-production challenges, so things that happen outside of their field. And so just like with the production challenges, we provided lists and got these seriousness rankings. And these non-production challenges overall were perceived as less serious compared to the production challenge of things. But the top ranked challenges included managing business activities and markets, infrastructure, labor needs, and organic certification costs, where 42% of farmers view managing business activities as a challenge and 25% view the cost of certification as a challenge. So sort of the top and bottom of these top challenges. And just as with the production challenges, there are some regional variations. So one example is in the North Central region, where seed producers from this part of the US really note that relationships with other farmers and contamination from GE crops are among their top challenges. So in this figure, you can really see where they rise to position number 2 and 3 in their top 5, whereas they didn't make the country's top 5 or even 7 at a different scale. And these sorts of perspectives bring us also to a question we had on intellectual property rights. So we asked farmers about how helpful or harmful they viewed different kinds of protections. And what we found is that 58% of seed producers and companies think that plant utility patents are harmful. So this is the darker colors on the left side of the figure, whereas only 9% thought they were helpful and 20% were either neutral or unsure. And on the flip side of that, these numbers were reversed for the open source seed initiative pledges, which is the bottommost row, where 60% of our respondents thought these were helpful, 3% thought they were harmful, and again, about 23% were neutral or unsure. And these perspectives were also shared by the researchers that we surveyed, which we don't really have a chance to get into for this presentation, but in the report, we certainly expand on the role of restrictive intellectual property rights and policy suggestions around these issues. And shifting gears a little bit, another piece of this seed producer survey was trying to get a sense of how these stakeholders view and fit into the broader seed system. So at the start of this presentation, we shared some of the State of Organic Seed project objectives principles. And a lot of them relate to building a strong, diverse, and productive seed network. But what we wanted to do was really dig into what seed producers envisioned for this network and understand whether the current seed system is meeting that vision. And so we asked folks to define a resilient seed system in their own words. And from this, we were able to draw out some of the major themes. And the definition that I have listed here is one that captures, I think, a lot of the voices that we heard from. This organic seed producer said that a resilient seed system is one that can succeed in the face of challenges of climate, political, and market force impacts. It utilizes the decentralized network of growers, provides widespread education and communication among all participants, and fosters cooperation and sharing for the benefit of all. And so after considering themes from definitions like this, we then asked a series of questions about these seed producer networks. What does a seed system actually look like? Who are you getting seed from? Where is your information coming from? How are you working along the supply chain? And what we can then do is map these relationships using methods from the field of social network analysis in order to figure out, is the organic seed network structured in a way that reflects these seed producers' ideas about resilience? And so in this next slide, I'm really just going to note the most general finding, which is that the organic seed network is structured in a way that mostly reflects seed producers' vision of a resilient seed system. And the figure here shows a glance of all the connections that exist from organic seed producers. So there's more than 300 stakeholders on this map, making over 800 connections that compose the really complex web of what the organic seed network is. And when we analyze the network data, we do see a lot of elements that make it resilient. There are lots of different actors in this network. They connect in loads of different ways that are generally decentralized. There are a lot of different hubs of activity for seed exchange, information exchange, and supply chain connections. But some regions are a little more robust than others, and there's an opportunity to use this method to identify where to target development and more resources. But you might have noticed by now that we have a lot of data and a lot to share. And so we'll be excited for when this report comes out so that everyone can dig into these findings. But for this network piece in particular, I'm going to promote in the bottom square here a research presentation that I'll be giving on Wednesday the 9th from 2 to 3:30 that really takes a deep dive into this section in particular. And so that is something you can get excited for, as well as reading the report, and is where we're going to end sort of our quick flash of the key findings from these different sections. And I think then we can hand it back to Kiki to move forward with some recommendations.
Thank you so much, Liza. Let's see when I get control here. Okay. All right, this is where we are, recommendations. All right, so as I mentioned before, our report includes a lot of recommendations, about 20. I'm just pointing to these 3 for now, underscoring some major needs that rise to the top for us as co-authors of this report and that are truly driven by the data, some of which you just heard about. First, public research investments in organic plant breeding and seed initiatives should continue to increase, while diversifying research agendas that prioritize seed producer needs identified in this report, including historically underrepresented seed growers. As Liza mentioned, this is the first time that we did a comprehensive assessment, a deep survey of organic seed producers and seed companies. And so we're very eager to share these findings with the Department of Agriculture, decision makers, foundations, and others who are involved in these types of investments. Number 2, we clearly see a need to train more organic seed producers and support existing producers. Again, pointing to the production challenges that Liza went through, as well as the non-production challenges. 3, the organic seed regulation should be strengthened and consistently enforced regardless of farm size. Jared touched on some of the differences between data sets when it comes to scale, and underscored too that some of the larger vegetable producers are increasingly noting contracts with buyers and processors as a significant or moderate factor for not sourcing organic seed, meaning they really don't have a choice at this time. So there needs to be a regulatory approach to this challenge moving forward. Our data showed, to this last point, our data showed that a number of stakeholders, including certifiers and seed companies, believe that there's a need to strengthen the regulation. The National Organic Standards Board, just a few years ago, unanimously passed a recommendation. It's on the desk of the National Organic Program right now. And that recommendation is to update the organic seed regulation with one sentence that simply aims to achieve or require, achieve continuous improvement year to year. So in other words, organic operations would be required to demonstrate improvements in organic seed sourcing year to year. And how that is measured is left up to the certifiers. And we're actually going to be talking a bit more about this in a session tomorrow called Addressing Seed Grower Concerns with Organic Certification, which I'll provide more information about here in a second. But given that one of our key findings from our latest data set is that no meaningful progress is being seen in organic seed sourcing, this regulatory piece is important to recognize and pursue. There are a few data sets, as Liza just mentioned, that we didn't get to in this presentation, the researcher survey, as well as data from a survey that we conducted with certifiers. We also didn't really dig into the policy section of this report. So for those of you who are interested in seed policy, I'm putting up here on this slide a few sessions that you can check out in the coming days. Liza just mentioned another session that or a presentation she's giving on the seed network data. And be sure to also check out the lightning talks. There are a number of sessions focused on intellectual property rights and other seed policy issues. And with that, we're going to move on to our friend Caroline to give you an update on the National Organic Research Agenda.
Thank you, Kiki. And thank you, Jared, for giving me control of the screen. As Amy mentioned at the top of the hour, my name is Caroline Baptist. I'm a farmer and I'm also the communications manager for Organic Farming Research Foundation, also known as OFRF. I'm going to share with you a very brief overview of the 2022 National Organic Research Agenda. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about OFRF. And I am trying to click through. All right, thanks. So OFRF, we are a 30+ year nonprofit. We were founded in 1990. Our mission is to foster the widespread adoption of organic farming systems. We do this through supporting and funding organic research. We create farmer training materials and distribute them as guidebooks or webinars. We do a ton of policy and advocacy work, and we do try to do public education on the importance of organic and how organic is a part of the climate solution. The National Organic Research Agenda is a pretty comprehensive report that's released by OFRF. We've historically have done this every 5 years, just like OSA's State of the Organic Seed Report. We had our first report in 2007, and then again in 2016. We had a little hiccup with COVID, but we're excited to be releasing this year in 2022. We conduct farmer surveys and focus groups. We collect the data and present the outcomes in our report. And then we also share our research and policy recommendations based on the information that we received from these surveys and focus groups. So for the 2022 National Organic Research Agenda, which I will also refer to as NORA, we started our surveys in 2020. We had over 1,100 certified organic farmers and ranchers participate in our survey. We had 71 transitioning to organic respondents as well. And the whole demographics for the entire group is pretty reflective of the National Agricultural Statistics Service's own 2019 organic survey. Our topics of discussion for these conducted surveys included soil health management practices, water conservation, organic inputs, and of course, organic seed. And we did find that organic producers are leading the nation in the adoption of soil health management practices. For example, our data says that 76% of organic field farmers plant cover crops regularly, and that's compared to just 10% of conventional farmers that do the same. As far as examining the complete NORA, we have illustrated the top 5 challenges that farmers and ranchers face when they're running various parts of their farming operation. With their production challenges, we found that weed management was the top challenge for the entire database set. Accessing labor was the number one. Oh, sorry about that. Accessing labor was the top non-production challenge with the entire group. We found that farmers and ranchers really require technical assistance for organic management of weeds, pests, and disease management. And they're very concerned, an overwhelming amount at 77% of respondents are concerned about the integrity of the USDA organic label and organic fraud in the general food system. We compiled our information based on the SARE regions, which there are 4, as well as agro-eco regions, which there are 6. We also compared the experience of beginning and experienced farmers. We define a beginning farmer as a farmer with 10 years or less of farming experience. We also highlighted the differences between BIPOC farmers and non-BIPOC farmers. And we did find that BIPOC farmers are experiencing many production challenges, and they're also experiencing them at a higher rate. This, we do think, is reflective of the racial inequities in our food and farm systems, and we do address this issue at the end of our report in the recommendation section. So what's next? Well, we're excited to release the 2022 NORA report with OSA's State of the Organic Seed Project. I would encourage people to visit the OFRF website where we'll have updates periodically on the publishing of this report. You can also visit us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. And we also have a newsletter sign up on our website, and you can receive NORA updates there. So that's just kind of a very quick overview, and I look forward to any questions in the chat and also talking with you all during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. If it's easy to give me back control, Jared, I would take it. Let's see. Got it. Okay. Let's see. All right, so before moving into our Q&A, I just want to quickly acknowledge that much of this project, especially Organic Producer Survey and our collaboration with Organic Farming Research Foundation, was funded, maybe not surprisingly if you were listening before, about the Organic Research and Extension Initiative Program, a grant through that competitive grant program. And of course, we're so grateful, Caroline, to you and your team at Organic Farming Research Foundation for being just a stellar partner throughout this project. Western Sustainable Ag Research and Education, a grant from the Western Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program, helped fund Liza, much of Liza's work on this project through a graduate student grant. Super grateful to Sarah, a fantastic program that's been around for decades, and that OSA advocates for increased funding of each year with our policy partners. And then we want to thank all the organic certifiers. Some of them may even be on this call, and organic farming groups that helped to distribute our organic producer survey. And then of course, everyone who took time to take our surveys, researchers, seed companies, seed producers, certifiers, organic growers. Just so grateful that people take the time to share their experiences and needs with us so that we can do these types of analyses and share them with people who can help affect change. So on that note, thank you to all of you for being here today. And we're eager to have a conversation with you, hear your questions, ideas, ways that this project can be improved. We are all ears. I believe we're going to take people off mute, Amy. Is that right?
I think so. I mean, we have a really large group, so I think people can either raise their hand, and I'll constantly kind of going back and forth through the screens. And you also are able to pop your question into the chat, and Kiki and I will both be monitoring that chat, but feel free. I think, Michael, you can go ahead and unmute people, and we'll see if anyone raises hands or pops a question in the chat. I see Jason from Ireland Seed Sovereignty. I'm thinking if you want to come off mute and ask your question, please go ahead. And if not, Jason, I'm happy to go ahead and read your question, but I'll give you another minute.
Yeah, I've got.
I'm
just wondering, was there any question in the OSA survey about the use of irrigations for non-organic seed, and whether growers were finding that using organic seed, they got better results?
Mm-hmm.
Like, as a grower myself, and as a seed saver now, I found that using organic seed gives better results. So getting a derogation for non-organic seed might be a false economy. But did you actually ask any questions that might open that up? Like,
one thing that comes to mind, and I might lean on you here, Jared. Thank you for the great question, Jason. We have asked a question related to organic producers, again, not seed producers, but crop growers' experience with the quality of organic seed compared to non-organic seed, to conventional seed. I'm trying to think of what other data points might get to your answer. We asked growers which crops are in need of organic plant breeding attention. We also encourage organic certifiers and inspectors to ask growers who aren't demonstrating increased improvement to conduct variety trials on their farm so they can see if there are organic varieties available on the market that perform as well, if not better, than non-organic seed. And we include this as an option in one of our questions of organic farmers related to variety trials. I know that I'm not directly answering your question, so I'm going to invite Jared to pipe in if there's anything else you think would be relevant.
Yeah, this year we asked I think a question closer to what you're referring to in our last report. We did trim down a few questions in this, so that really the only two questions that at least tangentially relate to what you're saying were those two that I reported out, were asking whether organic seed was important to the integrity of organic food, and then asking how important organic plant breeding was. In the past, and I was trying to look to see what the exact language was, we asked questions around like how important organic seed was in your marketing, and there may have been a question. I was trying to see what we had, we said, we asked questions like this. I use organic seed usage as part of my marketing. I want my seed supplier farming in a similar system as mine. I want my organic seed purchases to encourage organic breeding. We asked these kind of agree or disagree statements along those lines in the last report, but didn't in this report. And none of them, I guess, were exactly kind of your question, but I think it's worth looking at for future reports.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so we now have Michelle. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, just thanks to everybody for all this really incredible information and research and data. I had a couple of questions. I asked them in the chat, but specifically pertaining to like accountability, maybe traceability, transparency. How do we, either as growers, producers, farmers, researchers, how can we create a system of like transparency and accountability and also enforcement, right? Like there's always going to be people who maybe say they're doing it but aren't doing it. I don't really know. I don't really know how to do that, but I think that it's possible. I would hope that it's possible. I mean, I know that there are a lot of small seed growers when you're talking about, say, diversified farmers and growing vegetable crops, CSA market gardens, things like that. When you start getting into the big, crops like wheat and rice and kind of foodstuffs, inputs, things that are grown on these big kind of monocrop scales, is it even possible is the question, I guess.
The challenge, Michelle, and I'm probably stating the obvious, but is that making improvement in this regard of having more organic seed available, having more organic growers plant organic seed, there isn't one strategy or one silver bullet solution. It's going to take more consistent and stronger enforcement from a regulatory perspective. It likely will take some changes and more authority from the National Organic Program itself, perhaps in the form of that regulation update that the NOSB passed a few years ago. It's going to take organic seed suppliers taking risks. They already are taking risks. Some are avoiding taking more risk until they do see improvements in organic seed sourcing more broadly. Because right now, because organic seed is more expensive to produce, there isn't a lot of incentive to put a lot of money there if there's no assurance it's going to be purchased, that growers are going to be strongly encouraged to use that organic variety over the conventional one. So it's this multi-pronged approach, and there are some interesting like market-based solutions arising. And I will say too, Jared mentioned that we're seeing more large-scale vegetable producers, for example, saying that the contracts dictating what variety needs to be grown is a reason for not sourcing organic seed. So this is a really tricky issue between buyers and growers that we at OSA feel needs to be addressed. We don't have all the solutions. When the National Organic Standards Board talked about this specific issue a few years ago, in the context actually of this organic seed regulation update, and in the context too of recommendation they passed to update the guidance document for certifiers, which if any of you are familiar or not familiar with guidance documents, it's a document that isn't you don't have to follow by law, but many certifiers and inspectors do consult these guidance documents published by the NOP to help clarify a regulation and provide more clarity on how best to enforce it. So I feel like I'm going off track here, so forgive me. But again, when they did discuss these buyer contracts in the context of an updated certifier guidance document, if my memory is serving me correctly, they weren't able to find a clear solution there from a regulatory perspective. If anyone's a certifier or inspector on this call today, please chime in with more ideas and details. That's all I got for you right now, Michelle, but I encourage other people to weigh in too.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think it dovetails nicely into one of the questions I asked in the chat about, economic viability, right? Because even though buying organic seed at any scale is just a more expensive proposition, and how that impacts the viability, the economic viability of farmers, right? It would seem that organic seed at some point has to reach like critical mass in order to see the price, either come down or be able to match non-organic seed in order for farmers to, be able to make their profit margins and stay viable. Is that a wrong assumption, or is it just one of those things? It's just an economic supply demand, thing that we have to all contend with.
Does anyone else want to weigh in? Are there any organic seed suppliers?
Well, why don't we go to Louisa's question now? And if anyone does want to circle back around, it's a really ripe area for discussion, that's for sure. But thank you, Louisa. Go ahead.
Thanks, Amy. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great. My name's Liza. I am a researcher turned seed producer in Northwestern Washington. And yeah, thanks so much to the panel and the organizers for this really excellent session and all the amazing information that's in the report. My question is about where the research funding is going. I think, as far as I'm aware, the State of Organic Seed report has tended to show that research funding for organic agriculture has overwhelmingly gone into plant breeding projects rather than seed production projects. So I'm curious to know, whether the authors, Kiki and Jared, have an opinion as to why that's been the case. But I think the point that I would mainly like to make is I would love to see a really strong and clearly worded recommendation this time around that that seed production is an important target for research dollars. Perhaps at this point even more so than plant breeding, because I think your data also show that the primary challenges being faced by organic growers are not related to varieties. It's really, there's a lot of production challenges. And if seed producers can solve some of these production challenges and we can get more efficient at growing seed, then we might even collaterally address some of these pricing issues as well. That's all I've got. Thanks.
It's nice to see you, Lisa. Thank you.
I guess I could start to address what your question, comments, Louisa. I don't know exactly why the funding has gone the way it does. So as background, as part of kind of one of the projects within that supported the State of Organic Seed project was a planning grant actually through OREI to look specifically at seed production research. And in going through that process, something that we identified is that there just aren't very many programs that are actively looking at kind of agronomic seed production questions around things like yield, around questions of spacing or managing biennials, or equipment and cleaning methods, any of those things that are there not really much organic seed production research. There's really just not much seed production research at all. And that, I think, stands in contrast, and I don't have the specific numbers, but just based on our outreach to researchers, that that stands in contrast to, though public plant breeding is certainly threatened in many ways, it is a much stronger field than seed production. So I think that I think in part it just it reflects that there isn't as strong of a field of research happening there, and so not as many people are including seed production in their research proposals. Mm-hmm.
Louisa, do you have another question? Your hand is still raised.
I don't. Sorry, I always forget to
That's
lower
okay.
my hand.
No problem. I just want to highlight a couple things that have come up in the chat. Margaret said that they do actually follow some of the program handbook guidance, but the guidance can't go beyond regulation. So that is promising that knowledge is being disseminated more. And I'm actually really interested. There's a chat going on right now about Irish standards. And I remember 2 different times when working on policy things, looking to Europe and trying to find things in Ireland a couple of times. So I'm really appreciative of Jason for bringing a couple things to our attention. I think an argument I've been making a lot lately is that there will be a very clear need for more organic seed production when Europe is mandating its use in organic production. I think that could potentially help get at this. And I'm also really intrigued by this conversation about more seed production research. We all know that technical assistance and applied research is so critical. And I think that having more funds. I know that Chico State just has got a big NRCS grant to be working on more general farming, but hopefully seed will get into that. Let's see, what else do we have? Any other questions? Again, feel free to come off mute or raise your hands. We would be delighted to hear from you.
As we're waiting, Jared, I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot, but do you want to just let folks know about a new feature with the project this year with the searchable data sets?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the features that we have this year is, in the past, there's always been a desire for more detail, even than in our report, and then even in kind of, we've included a lot of the data in an appendix, but people would like to know, well, what about, this question as for, how did larger scale organic vegetable producers respond to this, or how did growers in the Northeast respond to that? And so here, I'll do a quick little screen share here. So what we've been working on is a interactive data portal for the information, so that you can see the responses for to all these different questions, and you can be able to filter them according to scale, according to different regions, and that includes that organic crop producer data set that we were talking about, but also it also includes the seed producer data set and the researcher data set and some of Liza's network analysis, so that you can look at, if you want to say, okay, top 10 crops in the organic breeding, how did people who only grew vegetables respond to that versus, how did people who only grew field crops respond to that, or how did people at different farm scales or in different or in different states, different regions. So we're hoping that's going to give all of you, again, kind of that chance to really dig into the data for yourselves. And not that we aren't completely happy to field your questions. If you're interested in all this stuff, obviously we are too, but it's going to be hopefully a useful tool for everyone.
Thank you. I'm really excited about that.
Looks like we have a question from Mary. Mary, go ahead and take yourself off mute.
Thanks. So I'm coming to this from more of a 20-year background in marketing. I worked for Costco Wholesale in the packaging department for 9 years. And I worked there when they were shifting over to get hold of some of the organic market. This was before they got sued for their packaging that depicted happy cows in open fields, because truly their cows were in capos. So when it comes back to cost shift, consumer demand, there's been other conversations that I think are really practical, but it may sound kind of radical here, about finding chemically dependent systems and systems that rely on inhumane treatment and exploitative labor practices. And I don't know, maybe in your coming 5-year report, you might shift the questions a little bit, because I know a number of producers and cost is an absolute factor. So there's that. I think that conversation of finding the people causing the problem came up the beginning of this administration, speaking about national politics, and got shot down immediately. And I know that's always a fear, but I think unless we let kind of coalition build and stand up together and make a clear ask, we won't get those conversations on the table. Respectfully, thanks.
Yeah, Mary, I think your question dovetails well with what Michelle was getting at too earlier. I wish I had good market-based solutions at this time. But I do know that cost is a real factor for growers. And so what is the strategy there? Any other comments or questions?
think the comment just brought up, I've been reading the report a lot recently, and I'm excited for everyone else too, but we certainly maybe talk about a similar issue with GE contamination spread and what coexistence means between these different farming systems. And I think it is discouraging to see trends like regulatory trends that just are putting the burden of limiting contamination on organic growers and not on, those that are spreading, or have zero accountability to what they spread, whether it be chemicals or genetic material. And I know that the report sort of laments the zero movement on that from the other side of the growing system. And I think maybe many of us just feel stuck with that. How do you budge this big hurdle? So I'm only just lamenting with you, perhaps.
For anyone who wants to continue this conversation, we've mentioned some other policy sessions, but I don't know who has control over the PowerPoint right now, but all of our email addresses are on that last slide if we want to pull that up. And as I mentioned, our last two SOS reports are on our seedalliance.org website. We also have a separate landing page for our State of Organic Seed project, where we will be distributing our next report in the coming weeks, and that's stateoforganicseed.org. So if you go there right now, you'll see findings from our last report and a teaser for our next report. But if you want to jot any of this information down, please do stay connected. You can sign up for our newsletter at our website as well, seedalliance.org. And when you do that, you can actually opt in or out to policy action updates. And we also send region-specific information as well. So just wanted to make sure you all had this information.
Wonderful. And I know that we are still able to keep this conversation alive and well within the Seed Commons. So feel free to join me over there. And also look forward to seeing some of you, hopefully, at our other policy sessions this week. And, I would also like to remind people a couple things. There are a lot of frustrations in this, and we all understand. It seems like a lot of people understand the bad actors and the challenges that we face. But, I think there was a lot of exciting information presented today, and I want to take a minute to just ground and think about what you will be doing with this information or how you will be using this information, and move on from there. And also one more plug for filling out at the end of the week or whenever at the end of this day your conference evaluations. And I've so far been incredibly impressed with how easy it is to schedule things. So thank you to everyone who's gone into making it possible to join these. And thank you all so much for being here today.